This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
If you're running a retail business, don't let disorganized order fulfillment cause chaos. Use ShipStation instead. From running a business out of your garage to multiple warehouses, ShipStation is ideal for every phase of your growth. Save time with one login for all your stores and by automating tasks. Plus, you'll get the best shipping rates from global carriers. Calm the chaos with the shipping software that delivers. Start a free trial at shipstation.com/audio. That's shipstation.com/audio.
For weeks now, New Jersey residents have been plagued by unexplained drones flying overhead.
Is there intelligent alien life? And if so, has the government been covering it up?
All right, UFO sightings the military can't explain. Congressional hearings, Pentagon whistleblower. What does it all mean?
What does it all mean? We are here to try and figure it all out with our new Ancient Aliens podcast. There is a doorway in the universe. Beyond it is the promise of truth. It demands we question everything we have ever been taught. The evidence is all around us. The future is right before our eyes. We are not alone. We have never been alone. Listen to the Ancient Aliens podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we finish up the timeline in the West Memphis 3 case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my savage co-host, Alice.
Hey, Brett. Way to go. Anyone who hasn't been listening to us chit-chat for the last 10 minutes, which you haven't if we have a great editor, who we do.
Yep.
But I was telling a cute story about my son's gang of boys, and they call themselves Savage. And how cute.
Yeah.
And this is relevant because he's the same age as our sweet boys who were the victims in this case.
Well, since you bring that up, I mean, this is an aside we'll talk about later. You know, one of the things the boys would say is that they had a clubhouse or hangout in the woods, and some people really focus on that because there is no clubhouse in the woods, as if they mean a literal clubhouse when, once again, you're dealing with 8-year-olds. Very imaginative. My kids have clubhouses and boats and pirate ships and all sorts of stuff all over the house. There are no pirate ships in my house. So
Two bushes in our backyard is called the Magic Forest. It's just two bushes.
There you go. So sometimes, I mean, we're digging into this case about as deep as you can, but sometimes I think people forget that we are still dealing with children. So sometimes it's not going to make sense.
And I was going to say, not only are we dealing with children, like across the board, those who are convicted, older children, of course, but teenagers, the victims who were really children at 8 years old. But then so many of the witnesses are also children, classmates of the victims, you know, and not that they don't speak the truth, but there's just different ways of perceiving the world when you're 8, 9, 10, even 18 versus when you're 40, 50, 60.
And this case is obviously different from a lot in that it's gotten so much attention, but I think it's also interesting and probably sort of a microcosm of how crime affects people. I mean, this is the people who we're talking about, like Alice said, they're classmates, friends of the victims. people who knew the convicted. This case has in many ways dominated their lives. I mean, for the rest of their lives, they get asked about this case, they think about this case. I mean, this thing that happened to them, this traumatic event, is something that's never let go. And for some, in a very serious way, I mean, there are people who've been dealing with trauma from this case who weren't even, necessarily directly involved, but they became involved. They were pulled into it. I'm thinking of Aaron Hutchinson right now and everything he went through, but we'll talk about that more. We are coming to the end of the timeline only because we're keeping it a little bit high level. I mean, I realize we're on episode 7, so I'm not going to try and tell you that we've been brief, but we're going to finish up the timeline today, and that will be the end of West Memphis 3 101, and then we'll get into the higher level classes for everybody who is interested in this case. Last week, we got through to June 9th, 1993, and that's where we're picking up today.
So June 9th, Michelle Carter tells the police that Shannon Bowles told her that Damien said he killed the boys and bit off their penis. Now, Shannon Bowles, on the other hand, also tells police that Michelle Carter told her that Damien said he killed the boys. This is not unlike many things that we've heard so far in this case. A lot of he said, she said, he said. And then also the people who are supposed to be the in-between he said or she said says something that contradicts the other testimony. What we haven't heard, of course, is someone said directly from Damien, what they say.
And I love this incident because this is such a good example of why you have to be careful with this case and really any case. People will take things that witnesses say they heard and say, hey, there you go. It's definitive proof. That person heard X, Y, or Z say whatever. And then you have this instance where you have one person saying that another person told them Damien did it. And then when they go and talk to the other person, they say, no. It was the first person who said that. I mean, just a great example of how in this sort of maelstrom of rumor and innuendo and everybody wanting to be a part of it, there's sort of a natural human reaction to want to be a part of this because it's such a big story. You have these kinds of things that initially you're like, wow, she heard Damien say that. This is a big piece of evidence. And then it very quickly falls apart.
And here's why. Because the way we speak in the world is different than how you run investigations and what is allowed in court specifically for this reason. It is fine and it is not lying when you speak in certain terms that are vague or conflate things in our everyday. This is how we tell stories, right? It's very boring to tell a story like an evidentiary hearing. I say, I heard from Brett something, when really I heard from someone who heard from Brett. But I don't give you the entire chain of custody of whatever I'm telling you, because that's how we tell stories. We're narrative communicators rather than chain of custody communicators, right? And generally for communication purposes, it's fine because you get the idea that I learned information from Brett because it has to do with his office, for example. And that's where the information is originating. And that's why I have some sort of reason to know it comes from over there. All fine when you're just having regular conversation, even gossip. Is it that Michelle or Shannon are lying? No, but you can imagine they're in a group or it's just the two of them. But more likely, it's like they're hanging out, say at the skate park, at the mall, and everyone's talking. They said, did you hear Damien said this? And Shannon turns to Michelle and says, did you hear this? Shannon thinking that it was from Michelle, but really Michelle heard from someone sitting right next to them. And they're all talking about it, and they're all talking about it as if it's true, so that when they're questioned about it, they're like, oh, I absolutely heard it, which they probably did. They probably absolutely heard that Damien said this. But they can't pinpoint where it came from because this is how conversation works. This is how narrative conversation works versus who told you, how do you know? And this is why, by the way, we have to call witnesses to the stand. You can't just rely on hearsay. This is a classic example of why they need to be subject to cross-examination. So you can get to the core of, were you the one who heard it? Could you have heard it? Did you have the ears to hear? But you said you had noise-canceling earbuds in at the time. How could you possibly hear? These are all relevant questions to test the way that we communicate in regular world, if it can translate to specific narrative for purposes of evidence. So all we have here is the same type of hearsay without any sort of being able to pin down that Damien actually said something. But as you can tell, more than one person in this community are talking about hearing that Damien was willing to say it. Does that mean Damien said he killed anybody? No, but it certainly means that everybody's talking to each other and the same, at least, narrative or gossip is being passed around. Now, on June 9th, also this same day, Damien apparently attempts to take his own life by suicide. And he leaves a note that he says he loves his parents and he's innocent and he's going to be reincarnated. So this was a good thing in his mind. Damien had apparently saved all of his medication while he was in jail and then took approximately 12 tablets at once. Now, we know this because immediately after taking them, he used the intercom to let the deputies know that he had done precisely this. So, in other words, before really the drugs could take effect and there could be life-saving measures. So Damien was taken to the hospital and treated without incident. They got the drugs out of his system. He told them right away, so there was really no dangerous effect of him having taken all these pills.
And, obviously people over the years have said this was all Damien trying to generate sympathy, doing this with no intention of actually killing himself, and it was just one big show. I don't know. It's
hard to say, except that generally, also, I think it's well documented that the vast majority of people who attempt to take their own life, especially by something like pills, which could be potentially reversed, have remorse immediately after doing the act that could lead to their death. And so I think that is a general, that happens to many people, whether or not they're trying to create, some sort of narrative or not. Could you tell if he actually took all the pills?
No, he took them.
He took them. Okay, so he took them. Look, that's a big step. That's all I'm saying. I've never done that before. It's more than just talk. I guess he could have just said it and then hope that maybe no one found out that he didn't take them, but he in fact did. Okay, so this all happens on June 9th. Things are hot in this case, right? In terms of potential suicide is obviously very alarming. So the next day, June 10th, Buddy Lucas is interviewed by police. He says that he knew Jesse well, that Jesse loved children, and he couldn't imagine Jesse hurting anybody. However, he also stated that if he was hanging out with Damien, Damien could convince Jesse to do just about anything. This is not really helpful for Jesse because basically it's saying he himself wouldn't hurt children, but he is basically mentally able to be convinced to do something else that he normally wouldn't do, which, by the way, I think applies to probably most teenagers. Maybe not just Jesse, but obviously this will come into play because of the arguments of his diminished mental capacity. Now, Jesse's love of children was challenged by one of his other friends, though, Dennis Carter, who had been interviewed the day before on June 9th. Dennis, who was a lifelong friend of Jesse's, describes how a month before the murders, Jesse had punched a 13-year-old girl so hard as he could, in fact, that he ended up in juvenile court for it. And I think we saw this earlier in the timeline, that he had, in fact, been incredibly violent with girls who were much younger than him. And punching someone in the face is very different than a play punch in the stomach, even, as the face is, I don't know, in my household, when we wrestle, no faces is what we say, because you can do real damage to the face.
And I believe this was the girl that Jesse said that he'd had sex with, and she said that didn't happen.
Right.
And so he punched her in the face.
That was the thing that sparked it. It wasn't like a your mama sort of situation. It literally was to do with her. And that wasn't the only incident that Dennis told law enforcement about Jesse maybe not being just such a lover and protector of children. Because a few months before, a 5-year-old had been throwing rocks, and one of the rocks hit Jesse. I can imagine a 5-year-old throwing rocks. My kids do this all the time. And I can also imagine that they're not very good at aiming. And it would not surprise me that if someone were standing around, a rock would hit them. Well, one of these rocks hit Jesse. And instead of brushing it off, because it's just a little 5-year-old child, Jesse chased this little girl down and threw a rock that hit her in the head. And he stood over the girl after he hit her and he laughed. Dennis said he wasn't surprised when Jesse was arrested for murder because of these past experiences with him.
And, you don't often hear this part about Jesse because he is, if you've seen Paradise Lost, he's very much presented as this sort of nice, affable, sweet kid who clearly has some mental disabilities, some lacking in basic intelligence. But Jesse could be incredibly violent and had been violent before and had been violent with children. So just more sort of color to these folks. And we're going to talk more about their backgrounds when we get into the upper level West Memphis 3 classes. But we did want to give you sort of an overview of some of the things that are happening as this investigation is continuing, even post-arrest. So on June 11th, at this point, Jesse has a new alibi. And I say it's a new alibi because initially in his statement to police, including in his confession, and before his confession, he said that on the day of the murders, he went home and that he basically spent the rest of the day at his house. Shortly thereafter, a new alibi was remembered, developed, depends on your perspective, that in fact, he had gone to a place called Dias, Arkansas to go wrestling, and not like traditional Greco-Roman wrestling, but wrestling. Jesse wanted to be a wrestler, and he had like a luchador mask and everything. And he and a group of people would go to this area about an hour north of where they lived, and they would practice for, one day, maybe they're going to make it big. And they would do that on Wednesday nights. And this happened on a Wednesday night. And so there was several people who came forward and said, Jesse was with us that night wrestling. On June 11th, detectives, they're trying to nail this down, and they talked to Bill Cox, and he is going to blow a hole in everything. He's going to produce a receipt that shows that the money that was paid to rent this location where everyone would wrestle was paid on April 27th, not May 5th. Now, why is that important? Because most of Jesse's alibi witnesses recalled that he was there May 5th because that was the day that they signed the contract and paid the money to rent the gym. During Jesse's trial, there were several witnesses who would testify about this alibi, and this was devastating, frankly. It was you're a defense lawyer, you're having to make a decision. They knew about this, obviously. I mean, they had the discovery from the police. They knew this contract existed. They knew when it was dated. They knew what the testimony was going to be about the contract. They went ahead and put on the wrestling alibi anyway, and it allowed the prosecution to really just hammer these other people who were with Jesse, and several of them, by the end of cross-examination, were very sort of confused by the whole thing and really weren't sure at all now when this actually happened. So this ends up being a really bad thing for Jesse. And at this point, we're far enough removed from the trial that most people, when they talk about this case, they just talk about the wrestling alibi, and they don't really point out why the wrestling alibi fell apart so spectacularly in trial. But that's why, because of this circumstantial piece of evidence. We've talked about this a lot. Got a lot of witnesses. They're racking their mind. They're trying to remember what day things happened, when it happened. And a lot of the people in the trailer park were very supportive of Jesse. They would go testify, and they would wear a little yellow ribbon in support of Jesse. This was also really bad because the prosecution would ask every one of them, what's that ribbon stand for? Oh, you're on Jesse's side. You want him to get off. You'd be willing to say anything. You love Jesse, don't you? And they would all say yes. And so Jesse's alibi comes under a lot of pressure. And like I said, we'll talk more about that later, but this is the first large crack in Jesse's story. So also on June 11th, things are really coming together for the police. So Jesse's alibi takes a hit, and they also interview a girl named Christy Van Vickel. She is 11 years old at the time, and she says she was at the girls' club watching a softball game. There were several softball games that night, and Damien was there. Damien admits he was there. I always wondered whether he would say he was there, because it's like, why would Damien be at a girls' softball game? But he said something that I said earlier, not a lot to do in West Memphis, so people would just go watch girls play softball. So he's there, and he's there with Jason Baldwin. And she said that she overheard Damien talking about killing the boys. She told her mom, and her mom would eventually tell the police, which would lead to this interview. This statement was bolstered by someone named Jackie Medford, who was also at the same softball game, and she overheard the same conversation. And we'll talk about this more too, because we're going to talk about everything more. But if you're interested in this, I would advise going and reading the transcript on Callahan, or even better, listening to it. Listen to their testimony. Their testimony is not incredibly detailed. They don't give a lot of details about exactly what was said, but they stand up to cross-examination really well, and the mom is really convincing. So worth listening to, We will talk about this more, whether or not you can believe this and what the significance is of it if it happened, but big day for the prosecution. The other thing that happens on June 11th is Jesse meets with Dan Stidham, who is his attorney, and he repeats his confession to Stidham at that time. And initially, Stidham believed that Jesse was in fact guilty and sort of thought, I'm going to be negotiating a plea agreement here and maybe getting to a point where Jesse's going to testify against his co-conspirators in exchange for his life to avoid the death penalty, and maybe even have a possibility of parole down there somewhere. So initially, that's what Stidham thinks. Over the course of his representation, he eventually comes to believe that Jesse is lying about the confession and begins to believe that he is innocent. At some point, Jesse starts to recant his confession until he's convicted, and then we sort of swing back and forth. We're going to spend a lot of time on Jesse's confessions, and we're going to talk about all of them. People really focus on the first one for a good reason, but we're going to talk about them all and sort of the back and forth that happens with Jesse. But at this point, he's still saying, yes, I did this. Guys, if you're like me, you work a lot, your weekends are busy, you're chasing kids around, everything else, you're feeling and looking depleted, and you really want to do something about your health. And that's where Prolon can be a big help. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet works at the cellular level to rejuvenate you from the inside out, providing real results. And now they're upping their game with the new next-gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, they often fade. And that's where Prolon comes in. Its 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed structural approach to stay on track and see real results. I talked about this before. I know you hear this, you got all kinds of doubts because you're thinking, I don't know if I can do this whole fasting thing. Well, that's the great thing. This is a fasting mimicking diet. It makes your body feel like it's fasting while you feel much better. And by the end of it, you will be shocked at how good you feel. I know I was very surprised. I want you to try it because I want you to experience the same thing I did. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designated to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal.
Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. And it's developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers. Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. Both Brett and I did the 5-day program and we feel so much better. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors. Guys, I know this isn't new information, but the youth mental health crisis is all over the news, and we know social media is driving it. This just shocks me that teens spend an average of 9 hours a day on screens outside of school. That's basically a full-time job just scrolling mindlessly. I can imagine teens are doing this because I, as an adult with self-control, do that myself. But here's the good news. A company called Gab has solved the problem by doing something no one else is doing. Their approach is Tech in Steps. Tech in Steps works by providing a kid-safe phone and watch for every age and stage. Basically, the right device at the right time. So what does it look like? First off, Gab devices have no social media or internet apps. For younger kids, they have a watch with GPS tracking and safe zones. And for tweens, a starter phone with some features like monitored messaging and video calling. And finally, for teens, an advanced phone with features like parent-managed apps and a premium camera. Bottom line, you don't have to give your kid a device that was made for an adult. Get them Gab, which keeps them socially connected safely.
And if you're a parent, you've had this moment. I had it recently where your kids are getting older and all of a sudden they want these devices. They see their friends with them. They see the parents using them all the time and they want one too. My daughter, who is not old enough to have a phone, came to me and said she wants one of those watches that do everything. And I knew exactly what she was talking about. Well, Gab makes it possible to give her something that she wants to use without all the dangers of the internet. It's something that gives me peace of mind, and it can give you peace of mind as well. I can't recommend Gab enough. And you can use our code to get the best deal on something that will make parenting easier and give you peace of mind. Protecting your kids has never been easier. For the best deals, sign up to Gab today. No contract required at gab.com/prosecutors. That's Gab, GABB.com/prosecutors. Gab.com/prosecutors. Terms and conditions apply.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
June 14th, police talked to Barbara Dietert. She reports that in March, 2 people she identified as Damien and Jason had attempted to steal her dog. The implication is that they did so to sacrifice the dog in some sort of occult ritual. This lady does not testify, but just, I feel like half the job of the police at this point was like trying to figure out.
Sieve out.
Yeah,
people who just wanted to be helpful, but they weren't.
Yeah, and also it's just almost like a mass panic type thing, right? I just feel like I don't want to fall into the whole this is another Salem witch trial thing because that is so overplayed. But there's definitely some of that going on where this is such a big deal that people are seeing. They're seeing, Damien everywhere. He's in the shadows at all times, right? And they're remembering back. Just like they did, frankly, in the Salem witch trial. I saw her. He was out in the clearing. I bet he was worshiping Satan, right? So you get a lot of that.
And whether Jason and Damien were trying to kidnap the dog, it could have just been because they were rascals, and trying to kidnap a dog. The implication for the occult ritual is the part where I think the police need to sieve out. But it might be difficult because are they just coming forward because, Jason or Damien looked askance at their dog? Or did they make aggressive gestures because they're rascals?
Exactly. So on June 18th, James Bailey is going to tell the police something they already know, but it's always nice to get things sort of supported. And he says that he saw Damien and Jesse at Vicky Hutchinson's trailer, 2 doors down from where he lives. And we know this happened because at some point, Vicky Hutchinson, she's playing detective. She's friends with Jesse. She knows Jesse well. And really, if Jesse's innocent, she's the one who pulls him into all this because she gets him to introduce her to Damien because she's really trying to trap Damien. She's trying to get evidence that Damien did this. And so Damien and Jesse are at Vicky's trailer several times, and a little unclear what Damien and Vicky's relationship was. A little unclear what Jesse and Vicky's relationship was. Jesse's spending the night at her place. There's a lot of weirdness there that I'm not a huge fan of, but hard to say exactly what's going on.
In between, we're recording this over obviously many weeks, maybe months. And so we continue to read up on everything to do with this case. And we still continue to live, breathe everything this case. And so most recently today, I was reading about Vicky Hutchinson. And I was just texting Brett. I was like, just from a new perspective, I have a 7-year-old boy. I'm older than Vicky, but I'm about her age. If I were just hanging out with a bunch of 17-year-olds and having them spend the night, whether she has anything to do with this case or not, whether Damien and Jesse have anything to do with this case or not, apropos nothing of that, that is a strange situation. And it's worth mentioning because it's difficult to understand her motivations when obviously she keeps saying there's nothing romantic with these boys who are boys at the time, but the relationship is strange. The amount of time she spends with them is strange. The way she's inserting herself into the case is strange. Again, not to say that she has anything to do with this case, but it's difficult to know whether you can trust a single word she says because it's unclear where the motivation comes from. And this is not a regular insertion you would have from a bystander here. And she appears to be more than just wanting to insert herself into a very interesting case. Not to mention that these boys are closer in age to her son than she is to them. And her son was friends with the victims here. And if she really thinks Damien is a killer and she wants to trap him, why is she inviting this killer into the home where the friend of the 3 other victims who supposedly were killed by Damien live with her? And it's her own son. You know, you would think that she'd want to protect her own son. So if you really thought, because you would think you only want to trap someone who you really thought was guilty, why are you inviting this killer of 8-year-old boys into a home where the friend of those 8-year-old boys, another 8-year-old boy, lives? It doesn't compute, and I can't make sense of it, but I think it's worth noting because she comes up a lot in this timeline.
Yeah, I mean, Vicky Hutchinson, she's an issue, and we'll talk about her more later on. But yeah, you know, she involves herself in this case. She lies. She very clearly lies about several things. She then recants her story. You know, she's on every side of this. She had a lot of issues with the truth. It's one of the reasons she was talking to the police in the first place. So, but she's definitely a part of this. Really, no matter what happened, she's in the middle of it. So he talks about he saw Damien there maybe once or twice. Jesse was often there. Jesse, remember, would babysit her child. He also spent the night a couple times. You know, you may recall Vicky saying that she was afraid of prowlers, and so she had gotten Jesse to spend the night. And in fact, the night before Jesse was arrested, he spent at Vicky Hutchinson's place. So moving along, we're now moving towards the trial. Police are starting to follow up. We're going to take a big jump here. October 7th, 1993. Tiffany Allen, we've talked about her several times. She is the girl that Jesse supposedly punched in the face, and the police are asking her about that incident. They also ask her about any satanic groups in town and whether she knew anything about them. Initially, she said she didn't know anything about that, but when Detective Ridge sort of pressed her on this, she says that she does know about a group that would meet behind the old sewage plant at night. Now, she said she had heard of the group, but she wasn't sure it actually existed, and she didn't know if Jesse was a member of the group. She also mentioned a fight that Jason Baldwin had with another boy. Said that Jason had been hit hard enough to knock him down and his mouth was bleeding. Tiffany said that Damien bent down and dipped his fingers in the blood and then stuck his finger in his mouth. This is a reoccurring theme. You hear this several times with Damien. There's also an incident when he was in the mental health facility in Arkansas where he got in a fight. And I think in that case, he did the same thing with another boy. And this whole blood thing is a creepy thing that Damien likes to do, probably more to freak people out than as some sort of, you know, satanic ritual, but who knows?
Yeah, I think there are enough reports to believe that Damien really does or has tasted another person's blood. Whether that has anything to do with, you know, a satanic cult is another thing. But it's a memorable trait, shall we say, and certainly one that probably turns people's stomachs, which is why they're recounting these sorts of experiences. Okay. Also in October 13th, 1993, the police talked to Charlotte Ann Beloy, who claimed knowledge of the local cult. Now, she said that a number of kids would gather at various locations and they would, quote, huff gas and glue and everything else they could find and worship the devil. She told police that Damien had told her he was a devil worshiper. She also told police that the one time she met Jason Baldwin, he was at Lakeshore with Damien, Jesse, and another boy named Buddy Lucas. Remember, Buddy was the one who was like, Jesse loves children, would only protect children. That's the same guy. So someone who was trying to give good testimony, I guess, or good things to say about his friend Jesse.
And I'll say this is the most believable testimony about the cult because it's basically they did drugs together.
They did drugs. Which totally rings true for I could see Damien, Jesse, Buddy, all these guys, basically a bunch of teenagers getting together and huffing glue. And whether you worship the devil or not, I also believe that Damien often said that he worshiped the devil. Also, again, kind of like the blood thing. Was it more for the shock factor to be a rascal? I'm kind of liking that word tonight. And I say that really because that's what teenagers do, is you have to separate the actually dangerous versus just saying things to get a rise out of people. So I very much believe he said that he worshiped the devil. Whether this group of people actually worship the devil, maybe another story.
And look, this is in some ways a total aside. In Damien and Jason's trial. There's a lot of talk about devil worship and that kind of thing. I don't know that Gitchell believed. I don't even know that the prosecution really believed. And I don't know that anybody believes now, except for a few people. I did read one book that believes it. Really believes that, like, this was some sort of satanic ritual, whatever. I don't think most people think that. I think most people think if this did happen, it was something much more mundane than that. But I am fascinated by this whole weirdness with the satanic panic aspect in this case. We're going to talk about it a lot. We're going to do a whole section on it because I think it's worth just knowing the way the world was at the time. So, I mean, I can remember being in high school shortly after this, and I started high school in 1996. The satanic panic was over by then, but you still had sort of like, kids always do this kind of stuff. They're always like dabbling in things. I mean, I remember everybody being into magic and stuff, right? Like everybody was a magician. Everybody could do like something. I don't know. So I just wonder how much of this is just these people got together to do illicit things. And somehow, maybe because of the way Damien was and the things he was saying, that got transmuted into, oh, they're huffing gas and worshiping Satan. It's like the and Satan thing gets attached to, otherwise not innocuous. I don't want to say it's a good thing or not a bad thing to huff gas. Don't huff gas, kids. but relatively ordinary teenage activity gets this like witch thing going on with it. So I don't know. Like I said, I think a lot of it, Damien brought some of this on himself just because he talked about it so much and really wanted, I think, to give off the vibe that he was something special, right? I mean, that's part of it. That he's something special. He's involved in something different that all you people who go to church every Sunday, you can't understand this, right? I feel like there was a lot of that going on too.
And that's a really good point because it's not just talk. He dresses to get a rise out of people. He speaks, as we saw in his first interview. He says things to get rises out of people. He does actions like dipping his fingers into other people's blood and eating it, right? And I note this because whatever the motivation is behind it may not even be relevant, in that he takes actions to make you or the listener believe certain things about him. Doesn't necessarily mean he killed the boys, but when you see him willing to take actions, he does actually carry through with the actions. Maybe because he's like a complete jokester, willing to carry the joke, or, not a funny joke, but a dark joke to the end, which is different than people who are all talk and who don't take actions. He's one who takes action to lean into whatever he wants you to believe about him. So on October 14th, the next day, the police follow up with Buddy Lucas, who they spoke to previously that summer. Now, Lucas says that on the day of the murders, they had a barbecue and decided to take Jesse some chicken. Lucas says that when he dropped the chicken off, Jesse was gone. And he asked his dad where Jesse was. And he said he saw Jesse walking off with someone he did not recognize. Now, the next morning, Lucas went over to Jesse's house, and he said that Jesse was nervous, breaking out in sweats, and it looked like he'd been crying. He told him that he had to tell him something. Now, Jesse told Buddy Lucas he'd been walking the night before with Damien and Jason Baldwin in West Memphis. Buddy remembered being upset that they didn't come to get him because he was feeling left out. Jesse told him that he'd gotten in a fight and that he'd hurt some people. Now, when Lucas heard about the boys being murdered, he asked Jesse about it. And Jesse told him he was in trouble and that Damien and Jason had killed 2 of the boys. Jesse said that he had hit the boys in the back of the head and that he did that to keep them from running away. He then gave Lucas a pair of shoes. Lucas said when he gave him the shoes, Jesse broke into a sweat and started crying. Jesse begged Lucas to take the shoes, saying he didn't want anything to do with them. And Lucas told Jesse he was going to tell the police, but Jesse told him that Jesse himself would tell the police. Lucas wore the shoes on several occasions afterwards, including in muddy fields. So, this is a lot. Obviously, it sounds like what Lucas is saying is that Jesse is confessing in a lot of the same ways Jesse's already confessed to Buddy. And Buddy, like everybody else that the police have interviewed who has something interesting to say, they give him a polygraph test. And Buddy takes the polygraph, but before doing so, he says, wait, I'm going to recount my earlier statement. However, when the polygraph was administered, he registered deception when he denied the things he stated earlier to the police. So the earlier things was pretty interesting, I'd say, but it's detecting deception. Now, after he failed the polygraph, and the only question he passed, by the way, was whether he was present at the murder. So at least for the lie detector, he wasn't present at the murder, but everything else he failed. Buddy told the polygrapher he'd recanted his statement because he was afraid of what would happen to his family if he testified. Buddy would later tell Fogelman that he failed the polygraph because the police yelled at him and he was scared. Now, during this later conversation, Buddy told Fogelman he'd gotten the shoes in February after riding four-wheelers through the mud, which is the same thing he initially told police before he told the story about Jesse giving him the shoes the day after the murders. So after talking to defense private investigator Ron Lax, Buddy decided he did not want to testify. I mean, whew. So very interesting. Recants. Explains away the recantation, and there's obviously a lot of inconsistencies going on in his testimony.
And Buddy Lucas is one of those people that has sort of vanished away from this case. But man, wouldn't you love to talk to him? Because is he lying or is he telling the truth? The story he tells about what Jesse told him is very consistent with Jesse's confession. In fact, it's more consistent with a later confession that Jesse gives called the Bible confession than it is with his initial one. His initial one, Jesse says he didn't do anything to the boys. The only thing he did was he chased down Michael Moore and he brought him back. Basically, that's all he says he did in his initial confession. In his Bible confession, he says that he had done that, but he'd also struck one of the boys in the head, which is consistent with what Buddy Lucas is telling police. That's interesting because you would think if, for instance, Buddy is telling the story that he's heard was out there, or if the police fed him the story, you would expect that they would feed him the initial story, that they would tell him, or then that he would hear sort of in the ether the story that Jesse told, the story that was eventually published very quickly in the newspapers around Memphis. But the story he's telling is a different story, slightly, very slightly, but importantly. And so he feels like this could be it, right? This could be the key. This could be the guy who brings it all together. But then he recants, and he's so back and forth, and he's failing his polygraph and everything else. And whether you believe in polygraphs or not, he very quickly becomes this hard to believe witness, and you're going to have problems with him. Then Ron Lax gets involved, and this is another person who Ron Lax convinces either to tell the truth or to keep his mouth shut, once again, depending on your perspective. So, fascinating person. Not a lot of time is spent on him, I think, in a lot of the coverage of this case. I feel like more should be spent on him. And the police are still trying to shore this up because they see how important a witness he would be. And as late as January 3rd, 1994, they're talking to his aunt and uncle because they hear that they may have information. And they said that Buddy had told them that he received those shoes from Jesse after the crimes and that they had blood on them. Now, of course, no blood's ever found on these shoes, right? So, and it's hard, it's pretty hard to clean blood off of shoes. So take that for what you will, but this is sort of another consistency with his earlier story. Now, it could just be that, as we've talked about a lot this episode, Buddy is another person inserting himself into this case and has made a lot of this up to try and be important, and then at some point realizes, what have I gotten myself into? Hard to say which one it is.
Right. And you could see the case for him trying to insert himself just because literally in his interview with the police, he's saying the night of the murders, he was mad that he wasn't invited to go walking with them, right? Like, you even see whether that part is true or not, you see the way his mind is working in terms of like the FOMO. He's not part of this. Everyone's talking about them. These are the people he's hung out with. These are his friends. At least one of them is his good friend. Then obviously, whether you want to insert yourself into a murder investigation is how wise that is, I would say, is probably not wise. And maybe it finally hits him like, whoa, this isn't just FOMO. This is something much bigger than myself. And now I've told a bunch of lies and I have to unwind it, but I don't know how.
So early 1994, Jesse's trial is held on February 5th. Following that trial, he is convicted. On the drive with the police to the prison processing facility, he will confess to the officers. which leads to February 8th, 1994, and what will come to be known as the Bible Confession. Jesse gives a detailed confession to Dan Stidham with his hand on the Bible. He will repeat this confession to the prosecutors. Despite these confessions, Jesse will ultimately decide not to testify at the Eccles-Baldwin trial. He is obviously someone the prosecutors want to testify, and he doesn't do that. We'll talk a lot about that when we talk about his statements and what exactly is going on with his decision not to testify. It's something that's obviously pointed to a lot by people who believe the West Memphis Three are innocent, because Jesse has a huge incentive to testify. He could not spend the rest of his life in prison if he testifies, but he chooses not to do that. But it's not going to matter. On March 19th, Eccles and Baldwin are found guilty of murder. Damien, who is seemingly committed to doing everything in his power to harm his case, even at this late hour, says to the cameras recording for HBO's Paradise Lost, quote, "I kind of enjoy it because now, even after I die, people are going to remember me forever. People in West Memphis are going to tell their kids stories. It'll be sort of like I'm the West Memphis boogeyman. Little kids will be looking under their bed. Damien might be under there." His parting thoughts.
Great TV. Terrible, obviously, for like your life. I mean, this is like a Jinx moment before the Jinx happened, but also with HBO.
And this was the moment. So, I watched the whole Paradise Lost documentary, and, I think I was with basically everybody. You watch it and you're like, I don't know. This seems weird. Like all this devil stuff. There's some crazy people involved in this. They don't seem like they have a whole lot of evidence. Jason Baldwin looks like an angel. Jesse Miskelly obviously has some mental issues. And then you hear him say this and it's like, wow, what is wrong with that guy? And going away from that, I was like, look, I don't know about the rest of them, but I got some serious questions about Damien Eccles because of what he said. In later episodes there's 3 separate documentaries, but now they treat them as part 1, part 2, and part 3. Episode 2. In episode 2, there's a lot of effort to sort of claw this back and explain, he was really in his head. He was shocked. He was stunned. He was in shock. Didn't really know what he was saying, which, okay, fine, maybe. But when he says it, it's just, this is not the kind of thing you would expect someone who is, number 1, innocent, and number 2, has just been wrongly convicted, and number 3, has just been sentenced to death, to say to the cameras about what has just happened to him. He's the West Memphis boogeyman.
Right. It was like a proud. He didn't look shocked when he told it to the camera, right? To the producers of Paradise Lost. It was like a pride in being the boogeyman of West Memphis. So now on October 24th, 1994, Michael Johnson writes a letter to Brent Davis. Johnson says that he was housed with Miss Kelly at the ADC diagnostic unit. And he writes that Jesse told him details of the murder. And he asks him to, quote, "do everything in your power to keep Miss Kelly behind bars for the rest of this life. He's a very cold, morbid person." It's very interesting, right? This is the opposite. He's not exactly asking for credit because obviously Jesse Miss Kelly has already been convicted. He's basically saying, I'm afraid of this dude. He's really bad. Don't let him out no matter what you say, because everything he told me about these murders is just so disturbing. I'll say I don't think I've ever gotten one of those letters. I usually get one where it's like, I know who killed John Bonet or something like that. I can solve this mystery for you. He's not trying to solve a mystery. He's saying this guy needs to stay behind bars. Take it for what you will, because like all jailhouse confessions, maybe there's some stock in it. Maybe it's not. Maybe he just really hates Miss Kelly and wants to make sure this guy never gets out because he stole his pack of cigarettes. It may have nothing to do with anything, but this letter was written. Now, November 4th, 2010, so fast forwarding many years now, after years of failed efforts in the courts, the Arkansas Supreme Court orders a trial court judge to determine whether newly discovered DNA evidence or evidence of juror misconduct justifies either a new trial or exoneration of the 3 defendants. We obviously jumped ahead in the timeline because a lot happens. You're like, why? These 3 are convicted, and then what happened to basically bring this back to court to have a new trial? Boy, I don't know. They became like U2. The following around them after the HBO documentary of Paradise Lost. I think that's right. It's Paradise Lost that generates all of this attention to the case. And I don't say this lightly. It's like a U2 concert in support of they are then known as the West
Well, it
Memphis.
was a Pearl Jam concert.
There literally was a Pearl Jam concert, which is as big as it got back then. But much like other cases we've seen, like Serial and Adnan Syed and Hayman Lee's murder, it was public pressure and really a documentary that spurred all of this public outrage to seek this new trial and why the next part of the timeline happens. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. It's easier than ever to find personal information about people online. Having your address, phone number, and family members' names hanging out on the internet can have actual consequences in the real world and makes everyone vulnerable. More and more, online partisans and nefarious actors will find this data and use it to target political rivals, civil servants, and really even outspoken citizens posting their opinions online, like maybe your favorite prosecutors. With Delete Me, you can protect your personal privacy or the privacy of your business from doxing attacks before sensitive information can be exploited.
And Alice and I know this all too well. We're online, we're a target, we're always making people angry. And privacy is really important to us to the extent we can maintain it. Of course, we've been doxxed. We've had our information blasted online. We have seen what that can do, and it can have a real chilling effect, particularly if you're someone who's not used to it. Maybe suddenly you're not doing the things you want to do or saying the things you want to do because of that. Don't let it happen to you. Use the Delete Me. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners, today you can get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting Prosecutors to 64000. The only way to get 20% off is to text Prosecutors to 64000. That's Prosecutors to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. Guys, you know, we have more children than we can count at this point, and we want them to be healthy. We want them to grow up strong. We want them to get the nutrients and the minerals they need. And sometimes you think, hey, what about children's vitamins? But unfortunately, most of them are basically candy in disguise. They're filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk. And that's where Hiya comes in. It was created by pediatricians to include superpowered, chewable vitamins that your kids are going to love. Most kids, like I said, they're getting these vitamins that have 5 grams of sugar, and that can contribute to a variety of health issues, the last thing you want. But Hiya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk, yet it tastes great, and it's perfect for picky eaters. It fills the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment your kids need. It includes things like vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more.
You guys know at this point, between Brett and me, we have a gaggle of kids. I have a lot of little kids at home, and I'm always worried if they're getting enough nutrients. And it's honestly hard to find a vitamin that they enjoy taking. I don't like having to force them to take vitamins and then enter Hiya, because they loved getting their own personalized glass bottles that holds their own vitamins. And it even came with stickers that they get to decorate their bottles with. So it's personalized just for them. And it's actually my kids who remind me every single day, don't forget, we have to take our Hiya vitamins. It is such a relief to know that they are getting the best vitamins with 0 sugar. I also recommend checking out their new Kids Probiotic and Nighttime Essentials. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/prosecute. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/prosecute and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. Homes.com knows when it comes to home shopping, it's never just about the house or condo. It's about the home. And what makes a home is more than just the house or property. It's the location and neighborhood. If you have kids, it's also schools, nearby parks, and transportation options. That's why Homes.com goes above and beyond to bring home shoppers the in-depth information they need to find the right home.
And when I say in-depth, I'm talking deep. Each listing features comprehensive information about the neighborhood, complete with a video guide. They also have details about local schools with test scores, state rankings, and student-to-teacher ratio. They even have an agent directory with the sales history of each agent. So, when it comes to finding a home, not just a house, this is everything you need to know all in one place. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
That is brought before the judge for a new trial. Now, on August 19th, 2011, following nearly 2 decades of intense scrutiny, allegations of jury misconduct, new expert testimony, DNA evidence indicating that these 3 are likely to get a new trial, a deal is struck. The West Memphis 3 have had all of these people writing letters speaking in support of them, basically alleging everything you can in order to get a new trial. And the attention around their case is so intense. The prosecutors are like, let's strike a deal, because it looks like a new trial will probably be granted. And this many decades later, it is hard to retry a case. Almost no office will retry a case decades later, because evidence is just, withering away, quite literally, because people forget things, and it's been so long. It takes so much effort to retry a case this long after. It is not surprising to me that any prosecutor's office after this many decades would choose not to try a case again, even if the strength of the evidence was very strong. It's just a very difficult thing to do, because witnesses decades later, as you've seen, forget everything. I forget everything from last week, much less decades later. They strike a deal with the 3 convicted, and the 3 plead guilty as part of an Alford plea and are released. And we've said before that the Alford plea is a guilty plea for legal purposes, but you maintain your innocence. So in the years that follow, the 3 have continued to proclaim their innocence with periodic efforts to test new evidence. This is still going on today in 2025 as we record. There are still allegations that there's new evidence to be tested, and they're trying to get things tested, and every now and then it's like, oh, there's been another delay in testing. So in terms of evidentiary development, nothing has really happened since 2011 or even before that to change the face of the evidentiary landscape.
Yeah, and, it's one of those things where, who knows? They're trying to do some DNA testing now that's been delayed for reasons that are unclear. There's not a lot of transparency in how this is all going on. Hopefully it's being handled well. Initially, it was mostly Damian Eccles who was involved. Jason Baldwin and his lawyers have now gotten involved in this, and I think will probably ensure that this is done in the right way. I have more faith in Jason Baldwin and his lawyers, frankly. But we'll see what happens. Now, look, people wonder about this. You hear people say, if Arkansas truly believed that these 3 people killed these 3 kids, why would they do this? We know why the West Memphis 3 did this, because they wanted to get out of prison. And Jason Baldwin, by the way, famously, initially, supposedly, did not want to do this. He wanted to go through with the retrial. It was sort of an interesting point, because there had been no retrial actually ordered at this point. They still had to have that hearing. It would have been a long, difficult hearing, and frankly, I think the cards are on the table. There was going to be a new trial. And, as Alice said, they were going to be in a position where, we've talked about this before, you would rather have a circumstantial case, because you can always rely on circumstantial evidence later on. This case is based entirely on witnesses, based entirely on statements. Jesse's confession is what got him convicted, right? And they're going to have a lot of resources. They're going to have a lot of experts. They're going to come in and they're going to tear all that down. And there's going to be witnesses who don't remember. There are witnesses who have recanted, including some of the, we talked about some of these people like Vicky Hutchinson, for instance. She is recanted since then. They probably were going to lose. And the prosecutor was candid about that. When he was interviewed about it, he was like, I don't think we'd win if we did this again. So he didn't want to roll the dice, because what he did not want, and he claims that he still thinks the West Memphis 3 are guilty, but what he didn't want is for them to be exonerated, to have their convictions overturned and then the case just either be lost or go away. So we made this decision. And that's the thing about an offered plea, is no one is happy about it. But I don't think you should take it as Arkansas never would have done this if they really thought they were guilty. I don't think that's true at all. I think this was basically all they could do. And the West Memphis Three were willing to do this. And I will tell you, I think Jason Baldwin was right. If you've seen West of Memphis, supposedly, and I just assume this is true, it's not like I know, but supposedly Jason Baldwin really did not want to do this and was essentially convinced that Damien was sick and they're trying to kill Damien and, he's got all these problems, probably none of which were true. And he caved and did it and went ahead and went along with the offered plea. They totally should have asked for a retrial. I think back to the Michael Peterson case, the staircase. There was a good chance he would lose because he still had, the case was still good against him. It wasn't as good as it was the first time, but there were still things. There were things you could argue, right? The prosecution had a good shot there. I don't think they had any shot at all in a retrial if this had been tried again. And I just think that was a huge mistake. And I understand the desire to go ahead and get out, but I'll tell you what would have happened. Those convictions would have been vacated, and that judge would have let them out on bond. And I don't even know if they ever would have been retried. And then they wouldn't have convictions on their record. That's what would have happened if they had just done that. Now, that's easy for me to say because I wasn't sitting in prison, but I think Jason Baldwin was absolutely right that he should not have taken this deal.
And for those of you not following, basically the deal was that all three had to take it or not. They weren't going to split it up. And so I think Jesse and Damien were going to take it, and they were pressuring Jason to have to take it as well. And so I think he even said it in West of Memphis that he was doing it to free Damien. Like, it had nothing to do with him, which was very altruistic. I don't know that I would have done that, because just looking at the way the trial runs with all the direct evidence, with all of the firsthand testimony that has since been recanted / people have just died or no longer remember what happened, it's a really, really tough case. But again, like you said, we're not the ones sitting in prison. And if they took this plea, they knew they were going to get out. Otherwise, with their current sentences, they would spend the rest of their lives in prison.
So, if this were any other case, we probably could just stop here. We could give our theories and move on after 7 episodes. But that's not what we're going to do, because this case is not an ordinary case. I do feel like at this point, as I've said, if you've made it with us through the entire timeline, you now have a really solid idea about this case. But there's lots of stuff we glossed over because we didn't want to spend all day on it or an entire episode on it yet. We wanted to get you all this background. In the next few episodes, we're going to start off with our 200 level classes. I really like this analogy to like a degree. So this was your 100 level classes. Then we're going to do some 200 level classes. We're going to go back. We're going to talk in detail about a lot of the things that we have just covered in brief. We're going to talk about the autopsies. We're going to talk about the evidence. We're going to talk about the ligatures in this case, the knots in this case, which is very important. We're going to talk about stuff like that. And then we're also going to spend a lot of time on very specific things. Like, we're going to do a whole episode on the satanic panic. We may even do that next, because I kind of feel like maybe just go ahead and do that. So we've talked about it in detail and then go into the crime in more detail. We're going to spend a lot of time on Jesse and Miss Gelly's confessions. I was telling Alice, just to give you an idea of, there's just a lot here. So our outline on Jesse's confessions is as long as the entire John Benet Ramsey outline, which is hard to believe, but is true. So we're going to spend a lot of time on those. We're just going to be doing this for a long time. So I hope you're along for the ride until the end. I think this is fascinating. I will tell you, I was thinking about this. By the time we got to episode 7 of Karen Reed, I hated that case so much. I hated it. I did not want to talk about it for one more second. But this case, not how I feel at all. This case, I've really enjoyed, so hopefully you're enjoying it too.
So I want to say something, because I know we have a lot of new people who are joining us. Really like your analogy of the getting a degree, and this is like the background course, and then we're getting into the higher level courses. Another way, so that those of you who have not heard us cover deep dives like this before, think of it this way, because a lot of you may be thinking, they just got through the timeline in only 7 episodes. In 7 episodes, and they totally didn't talk about X, Y, or Z enough. This is how much is in this case. Think of it this way. It's like we're circling in, right? There's so many parts. One of those like adult coloring books where you like get smaller and smaller and every single little bit has even more detail as you get down to the granular level. We've tried to give you the lay of the land so you even know what we're covering, but we're going to get so granular within the broad strokes outline that we've just barely covered in these 7 episodes. And anything you think has been glossed over, go ahead and email us, but also hang on because it's probably going to be in one of these episodes. We are not glossing it over on purpose now. We're merely giving you the broad strokes, and then we're going to fill in the details within this picture that we are showing and trying to describe as we get into the case. And it's funny that we're just getting into the case at episode 7.
I often wonder, I went back and looked at our list of cases we were going to cover. I always like looking at that because I would list cases and I would put how many episodes I thought it would be. So this case, I had 4 episodes, which was like a lot. Like back then when we just started, I thought, man, 4 episodes that's a ton. And now we're
back then it was, like even when we did John Bonet, I know there was a lot in that case too. That was a long outline.
We could have gone longer. We could have.
That's my point is all of these cases that used to be long, we could have made them even longer.
And I don't know if this is better or worse. I mean, maybe you're thinking, man, I long for the days of 10 episode series. This would be so much better if it was only 10 episodes. I don't know. But like I said, by the time when we finish with this, I don't think anybody will be complaining that we glossed over anything. I'm sure they will because there's so much. I mean, you could talk about a lot of this stuff. But anyway, that's where we are. So thank you guys for staying with us this far. We have a lot more to talk about, and there's going to be some interesting stuff. We got some interviews we're doing. I think you're going to enjoy as well. We'll release those as Wednesday episodes, by the way. So, you don't have to worry about this being even longer because of the interviews we're going to do. I think the interviews will add color for you as we talk through this. If you have thoughts, and I'm sure you do, shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. I'll go ahead and tell you, as I said earlier that people were going to be emailing us things that they were confused about. So I'll give you one that someone did mention. So we talked earlier that on the day of the murders that the Dana Moore saw Terry Hobbs in the 7 o'clock hour that day. And someone asked how we knew that. Well, the reason we know that is because John Mark Byers, in fact, in case we didn't make this clear when we did it, John Mark Byers and Dana Moore give statements to the police. Dana Moore talks about how before she called the police, which was just after 8, she actually walked down to Terry Hobbs' house, to the Hobbs house. Interestingly, she doesn't say that she talked to Terry when she's talking to the police, but John Mark Byers says that when he talked to her, she talked about how she had spoken to, I think he calls him Mr. Hobbs, and his boy was missing as well. And so that would have happened before 8 o'clock because that's when they start calling the police. John Mark Byers initially calls the police right before 8 o'clock. He calls the county. He's directed to West Memphis. He gets in touch with West Memphis, and someone I think is dispatched at 8:08. And then that person, Regina Meeks, shows up, and actually Terry Hobbs is coming to John Mark Byers' house. It's the first time I think John Mark Byers and Terry Hobbs ever spoke, right as that's happening. So this is all very important because if you think that Terry Hobbs is involved, then you really kind of have to push the murders back in time, because sometime in the late 7 o'clock hour, probably between 7:30 and 8, he is talking to Dana Moore, and then right after 8, he is talking to John Mark Byers. So just something to think about, and something that came up because somebody emailed us. All to say, if you have thoughts or things you want more clarity on, shoot us an email. We're happy to talk to you about it. The gallery is discussing this case. Join the gallery. Lots of great discussion. If you want these episodes early and ad-free, join Patreon. You can also watch us record them if that's your thing. And hello to the 130 or so people who joined us tonight. Okay, Alice, anything else you want to say about the case?
We really reached the end of the timeline, and it really took 7 episodes, which I think shows you, please trust us, that we will go into detail on a lot of these things, because if we took 7 episodes to do the timeline, we are trying to do this right and to cover it well. And I hope you can tell so far, we are really just trying to present all that is there, because so much is not reported. And said this at the beginning, we really come to this with no agenda, and we continue to do this, and we endeavor to do it because I think this case has so much lore around it. We just want the record to all be out there, and then we can debate the merits of it once we're there.
Alice, do you have time for a question tonight, or do you need to go ahead and sign
Absolutely.
off?
Let's do
Okay,
it.
well, let's do a question. I'm gonna ask you this question, even though this question's kind of old now, but I think there's a couple ways to answer this, I think, that are universally applicable. So this is from Zeb. Zeb wants to know our opinions on Jessica Crumbly's lawyer. She seems like a hot mess. Is it intentional to get a new trial? Okay. So, no to your second question. And this is something people ask all the time, and I'll just tell you, it is never the case. Ever the case that a lawyer is intentionally being ineffective. It is just never the case. It is a silly, stupid thing to do because it's really hard to win an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. So much better to try and win the case than to like throw it so they can try it again. Like, it just doesn't even make sense, is the first thing. People always ask that. It is never the case, ever.
The only thing that might make sense is you tried your best and then later new counsel brings an ineffective assistance of counsel claim and you basically testify in support of that, saying,
but that will happen. Yes.
Right. You can say, like, it was my first murder trial. I didn't know that I should have done this. That was on me. It wasn't malicious or intentional to throw the case. But now looking back with all the experience I have, my first murder trial, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. So now I realize that's the case. That can happen. That's different than I'm going to throw this case in the first instance, because that's a very stupid play. Because even if you intentionally throw the case, and I don't know, these are real fact patterns from a case, by the way. You get drunk and you fall asleep at the table. That could still not win an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. So by throwing the case, quote unquote, you're doing your client a massive disservice. Not to mention, you're always supposed to advocate most vigorously for your client. You could be subject to bar complaints, losing your bar license. It's a very serious matter to do something like that. This is not a game of chess or whatever where you're trying. That's not in your cards to do. You cannot throw a case intentionally.
Yeah, and all the lawyers in this case, in the West Memphis case, would eventually say they were ineffective. Dan Stidham would say it's the first death penalty case he ever tried. He did the best he could. And look, I mean, if you read the transcripts, you can tell that Stidham's really trying, but you also see where he really did need a little bit more experience. I mean, there were times where the judge, he would object, and Stidham had this thing that he would give these speaking objections, is what we call them. Speaking objections, when you stand up and you say objection, and then you explain why you're objecting. And judges hate that. You're supposed to say, objection, irrelevant, right? You don't say, objection, Your Honor, that has nothing to do with this case, and I don't even know why he's bringing it up, and that's improper, and you should strike it. And he would do that all the time. And the judge would be like, so what is your objection? And I'd be like, relevance. And he would never get there. And so you could see that, like, he is new at this, and he's learning. So he would say that. And the other thing I'll say about defense attorneys, and this is true of prosecutors too, but defense attorneys, I feel like even more so. Defense attorneys, you see the whole spectrum. I mean, you see lawyers that are just like Clarence Darrow good, right? I mean, just so good at what they do. And then you see lawyers who have no idea what they're doing. But the other thing you see is lawyers who just have a difficult case. I mean, a lot of times people watch these trials and they'll say, man, I thought this lawyer's terrible. He's an awful attorney. Well, it's because he has nothing to work with. He's doing the best he can, but his best, at the end of the day, all he has is what he has, right? So what's he supposed to do? I mean, you can't make magic happen.
You can't pull a rabbit out of a hat every time.
Yeah. So, that's going to happen. And I would say this as well. Just give us lawyers some grace. You aren't too hard on us. Oh, y'all watching all these things on television. You think we're boring. You think, we don't have it all together. Trials are hard. And everybody's just fumbling around. I mean, you've probably noticed that when you watch live trials. Every trial is its own animal. It's like everybody's first time every time. And it doesn't really even matter how much experience anybody has, because the judges are all different. They have different things they like. I mean, it's
your
funny.
Clients are different. There's different things going on behind the scenes that you may not even see. You're exhausted. You have no sleep. It's like, it's an emotional toll on top of a mental toll and a physical toll to do trial. Like, trial is just hard. And then have that all be broadcasted in real time sounds like a nightmare, frankly. None of my trials have been ever broadcasted. And if it were, that added element is just a lot.
Yeah, somebody actually asked if there was anywhere, this was another 5-star question, if there's anywhere they could watch us do our thing. Fortunately, in our court, they don't allow cameras in the courtroom. Thank God.
Thank God.
So nothing we've ever done. Though I will say this, if you can listen to oral arguments I've done. So if you really want to hear oral arguments, if you go to the court's website, you can just look it up. You can listen to those, and those are fun. So that can be your homework.
Except they're probably not to you because it's not like narrative either. There are specific questions that are asked to the court, and unless you read the briefs or at least know the background of the case, for the most part, for oral arguments, you don't know what's going on. It's not like there's no timeline. No one builds because you have very limited time. You may have 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and that's it. So you don't you dive right in. You quite literally dive right in to the legal questions presented, and then the judge will probably cut you off in your outline and say, I don't care about that. I want to get to point 2. Tell me about point 2 and why you don't win on this hypothetical.
Yeah, for anybody listening, it's like an inside joke that no one explained. So it is
an inside joke no one explained. That's exactly right. Yeah. Like even a lawyer listening to an oral argument, if you have no background and haven't read the briefs, you can pick up kind of generally what's going on, but you're not going to know intimately what's happening.
I got one in August, but I may let another lawyer do it. So we'll see. Okay, well, this has been fun. I hope you guys will join us. We're done with the timeline. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty starting next week. So hope you guys will join us for that. We are so excited. We will see you then. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
So,
okay.
You want a funny story before we start?
Sure.
Sophie, thanks. My kids were all sick today, so I'm glad I look nice because I don't feel nice. So my oldest, who is adorable and so cute, he was like, I'm part of a gang. And I was like, okay. I was like, tell me more about it. I love that you're coming to me about this. And he was like, we're Savage. That's the name they've given themselves. It's obviously all boys. They're 7-year-old boys. This is actually on point for like what we're talking about.
This is where every RICO investigation starts.
Yeah, exactly. It cool, so he'll keep telling me about it. And he was like, and I was like, well, what do you guys do? He's like, we make mischief. And I was like, all right, like, great. I mean, are you like getting in trouble at school? Like, you know, be nice to your teachers, okay? And he was like, oh no, we have strict rules. And I was like, well, tell me about these rules. By the way, like, I don't know where they came up with this because, as you guys have heard, we don't watch TV. It's not like we watch West Side Story. You know, like, he has no concept of gangs.
Pluto TV has all the shows and movies you love streaming for free. That means laughter is free with gut-busting comedies like The Neighborhood, Boomerang, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Bueller. Mystery is free with countless cases to crack from Criminal Minds, Tracker, and Matlock.
I'm a lawyer, like the old TV show.
And thrills are free with heart-pumping hits like The Walking Dead and Pulp Fiction. Correctamundo. Feel the free Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.